The new method sees perestroika not as a surprising and spontaneous change, but as the logical result of 30 years of preparation, and as the next and final phase of the strategy. It sees in a broader context than Soviet openness has revealed. It sees it not only as a renewal of Soviet society, but as a global strategic design for restructuring the entire capitalist world. The following strategic objectives of perestroika may be distinguished. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, Anatoliy Golitsyn disclosed this plan as early as 1961, December to be exact. For the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. A. Restructuring and revitalization of the Soviet socialist economy through the incorporation of some elements of the market economy. B. Restructuring of the Stalinist regime into a form of communist democracy with an appearance of political pluralism, or democratization, I should say, or democratism. C. Reconstructing a repressive regime with a brutal face into an attractive socialist model with a human facade and a seeming similarity to the Swedish social democratic system. For Eastern Europe, economic and political restructuring of the existing regimes into pseudo-social democratic models while preserving specific national historical features such as the strong Catholic socialist tradition in Poland and the pre-war democratic tradition in Czechoslovakia. For Western Europe, A. Bringing about a new political alliance between the pseudo-social democratic regimes in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe and the Euro-communist parties and genuine social democratic parties in Western Europe. B. Restructuring political and military blocs, NATO and the Warsaw Pact, and the creation of a single Europe from the Atlantic to the Urals, incorporating a reunited neutral Germany. Are you listening? For the main United States alliances, A. Splitting the United States, Western Europe, and Japan. B. Dissolution of NATO and the United States-Japan Security Pact, and the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Western Europe and Japan. For Third World countries, the introduction and promotion of a new Soviet model with a mixed economy and a human face in Latin America, Africa, and Asia through a joint campaign by the pseudo-social democrat regimes of the old Soviet Union and Eastern Europe and the genuine social democrats of Western Europe led by the Socialist Internationale. For the United States, A. To neutralize the influence of the anti-communist political right in the American political parties and to create favorable conditions for a victory of the radical left in the 1992 United States presidential elections. And if you've been paying attention, ladies and gentlemen, they certainly accomplished that. B. To restructure the American military, political, economic, and social status quo to accommodate greater convergence between the Soviet and American systems and the eventual creation of a single world government. The paramount global objective of the strategy of perestroika is to weaken and neutralize anti-communist ideology and the influence of anti-communists in political life in the United States, Western Europe, and elsewhere, presenting them as anachronistic survivors of the Cold War, reactionaries and obstacles to restructuring and peace. Anyone who warns about Moscow's true objectives is automatically branded a Cold Warrior, even by people who have doubts about Moscow's motives. The new method penetrates the facade, tears the verbal mask off perestroika, and reveals its true meaning. which Gorbachev and Glasnost have failed to do. Lenin's teaching and the experience of the new economic policy are keys to understanding the essence of perestroika and the reasons for Gorbachev's downgrading and reunification of elements of ideological orthodoxy like the class struggle and his emphasis on common interests and the benefits of close cooperation. Lenin advised the communists that they must be prepared to resort to all sorts of stratagems, maneuvers, illegal methods, evasions, and subterfuge to achieve their objectives. This advice was given on the eve of his reintroduction of limited capitalism in Russia in his work, Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder. The new method sees perestroika as an application of Lenin's advice in new conditions. Another speech of Lenin's in the NEP period at the Comintern Congress in July 1921 is again highly relevant to understanding perestroika. Our only strategy at present, wrote Lenin, is to become stronger and therefore wiser, more reasonable, more opportunistic. The more opportunistic, the sooner will you again assemble the masses around you. When we have won over the masses by our reasonable approach, we shall then apply offensive tactics in the strictest sense of the word. It is obvious that Gorbachev's opportunistic speeches and his presentation of perestroika to the West are very clever applications of Lenin's thinking. Gorbachev's reasonableness and moderation are aimed at assembling and winning over the masses throughout the world, and yet another of Lenin's speeches is relevant here. Instructing the Soviet delegation to the Genoa Conference in 1921, he advised them to use moderate language in negotiations in order not to frighten the capitalists, and particularly to avoid reference to the class struggle, the violence, and the terrorist aspects of communist doctrine. Gorbachev's speech to the United Nations and Shevardnadze's pronouncements about a downgrading of the class struggle are classic applications of Lenin's thinking. The new method views the ostensible arguments about the class struggle in the Soviet Union as no more than a calculated device to win over Western policymakers and influence public opinion in favor of Gorbachev's policies. The new method also sees a close parallel between Western expectations arising out of the new economic policy and those arising. I've got to stop and take a drink of water. My tongue is getting tied to my cheek again. The new method also sees a close parallel between Western expectations arising out of the new economic policy and those arising out of perestroika. In view of this parallel, the outcome of the NEP can be instructive now. The new economic policy was presented by the Soviets and accepted by the West as a retreat from communist ideology and a decline in the power of the Soviet regime. In fact, the NEP revived the Soviet economy, stabilized Soviet power, and facilitated the creation of the Soviet Federation. Because of the NEP, the Soviets were able to broaden their ideological and political assault on the capitalist world. To sum up, the essence of perestroika is the creative application of Lenin's thinking and the experience gained through the NEP to the final battle with the capitalist world. It is a step backwards to take 2 steps forward. Perestroika is a Leninist strategy involving the calculated renunciation of ideological orthodoxy in order to win over the masses and to achieve strategic objectives in Europe, the United States, and the Third World. The experience of the new economic policy teaches us that contemporary Soviet pragmatism and opportunism are not lasting because they are tactical. Gorbachev is a committed Leninist who is carrying out the strategy of communist renewal as a means towards the ultimate conquest of the Western democracies. And if you don't believe it, ladies and gentlemen, I challenge you to obtain Mr. Gorbachev's book entitled Perestroika and read it very carefully.